Eric Rossi, the guy with the eye here, to do a fun, quick video tutorial, whatever you want to call it, thing for photography, and essentially involves having your camera without a lens on it and kind of having a lens on your camera. What the heck am I talking about? Here we go. So from the title of this video, you may or may not understand what this is, and that is basically free lensing, or if you're from the video side, lens whacking. Now, it's not what you're thinking. This is actually a photography trick or technique that you can use. Now, if you aren't familiar with tilt shift lenses and everything, essentially a tilt shift lens is something that connects to your camera and has several little adjustments on the lens, so that way you can distort your focal plane to get maybe this section more or less in focus when there's a lot of bokeh and everything. Basically, a tilt lens distorts your focal plane and you're able to control it to a little bit of an extent. Maybe a more real example is the Ryan Brenizer method. If you're not familiar with that, Google that. That's a photographer based in New York City who does a lot of this panoramic stitching stuff for portraits, and you can see multiple things. In focus, out of focus, foreground, background. And it's the same kind of thing in the way a tilt shift lens works. But that's just more of an affordable way. Tilt shift lenses are very pricey. But what exactly is free lensing? Well, free lensing is essentially the same thing, and I'll show you some close-ups on how it works and all that kind of stuff. And essentially what you're doing is you are changing the focal plane, you are changing the distance from your camera's sensor and how it reads from your lens. And that way you can get the same specialized effect with the extra bokeh where one specific little sliver of a part's in focus, or you want some light leak coming in, because essentially what you're doing is you're having your camera on. Don't worry, yes, there might be dust, there might not be, whatever. Don't get too, crazy about it. And what you're doing is you're essentially, I'm looking at my monitor for reference, and what you're doing is you are hand holding, or I recommend putting it on a tripod, and moving your lens around differently to get a specialized effect on however you're going for it. Eric, how the hell do you do this? It's actually very simple. It might take you like 15, 20 minutes, maybe a day or so to get used to, all depending on how you or what kind of gear you have. But the easiest thing is that obviously take a camera, DSLR, whatever you have. It only really works for something where you can take the lens off, so something interchangeable, not some little effect or anything like a point and shoot. But essentially what you do is, one of the best things to have is a lens with a aperture ring on it. So that way you could control that off of your camera, because a lot of times when you have a lens that doesn't have an aperture ring, for example, for this one, you have to manually hold open the aperture switch right here to do it, and it's actually pretty difficult to do. I'm not saying it's impossible, it's pretty difficult. And so that way I grabbed an old Nikon D lens and I was able to do it that way. So my recommendations are to grab a tripod, and if your camera has live view, please use live view. It's so much simpler than trying to mess around and hold and look through your viewfinder. But if you have to do it that way, totally fine, it can work. But if you have live view, one of the things I recommend is to set your camera up on a tripod, make sure your lens is on and everything the way it should be. If it has the aperture ring, make sure it's on the f/22, so that way your camera can read it. And what you do, turn on your live view and meter, meter exposed the exact way you want it. So get the f-stop you need, it's pretty much gonna be wide open when you're doing this. But get the shutter speed you want, the ISO, so that way it looks however you want on the back of your camera. That way when you take off your lens, you're not worrying about those settings, and the only thing you're really worrying about is placement. So you have all the settings ready to go in your camera. Then the next thing you do, as I say, is to turn off your camera, take off of your lens, and then if you have the aperture ring, switch it, unlock it from f/22 and put it down to maybe 2.8, 1.8, or whatever setting you used, or whatever your widest setting is, that really helps the most. Now, the proper lens should be above 50 millimeters. I've tried this with a 35 millimeter. It's really difficult to get this effect to work, but 50 and 85 are the really, really popular lenses, 85 being a little bit better. But in this video, I used a 51.8D, but it effectively works the same. If you want to try to do it the manual route, it's difficult, but just hold down, and now you're ready to go. All your settings are already set up, and it's as simple as just messing around with however you want the shot to look. Essentially what you do is I have it to where it's not latched in the camera, but I have it to where it's pretty much almost flush like if it would be normal, so that way you have something like this. Now, the way you move your lens is the adverse to how it affects the image. So let's say if you have a camera like this, and you're tilting your lens off the left side of your camera, the right side is what's going to get affected. And, vice versa. So it's the left side coming off of here, the right side of your image is going to get affected, the right side of your image is going to get affected, and that's where the focus will be. And one thing is, some suggestions say to focus to infinity before taking your lens off. I actually say focus to whatever you want to be in focus, or whatever you want to have this effect first, and then take it off. It doesn't necessarily have to be in infinity mode, but those are two options you can explore. So that is lens whacking. That is free lensing. I'll even, I'll pop up, or maybe I popped up an example already, but that's essentially what you're doing. You're just distorting, you're moving the plane of your focal plane, your field of view, by just changing a little bit of this. People modify lenses, they cut the backs off, they glue open the aperture rings, and they go really in-depth and insane. I mean, you can get a Nikon 51.8, a Canon 51.8, and hack it up and do it that way for under $100. I don't necessarily recommend that. I didn't do that. But you can, it's an option, and it's just simply having fun with it, getting a specialized look, a specialized effect, and it's just very, very simple to do. And one thing I'll mention is a lot of people like these little light leaks. And why does that happen is because, well, you're exposing your camera to light getting inside your sensor, and that's what's happening. You'll see some light come in, or depending on your spacing and everything. It's fun. And just another good point to realize as well is that if your subject is moving, or however your subject is, if your subject is moving further away from you, actually bring the lens closer to your body. But on the opposite side of things, if the image is closer to you, you might want to move your lens out a little bit more, and that way it'll work and compensate for the distance. And here are some common questions. Can you only use a Canon lens with a Canon camera, or can you only use a Nikon lens with a Nikon camera? No, you can actually use any lens you want with the camera, because you're not looking for an electronic connection. If you have old lenses, go for it, have fun. It doesn't matter the brand. Will this hurt your sensor? If you're smart, it won't hurt your sensor. As long as you're more of in a controlled environment, just don't go crazy. You might see a little bit of dust or something like that, but just get yourself a little rocket blower. And if you have to clean it a little bit, clean it. But it's just something fun and more artistic. Can I do this in post instead? You can do anything in post, but it always looks fake when it's not fake. Do it real. Have some fun. The whole thing is to experiment, keep going until you get the different results that you want. It's a really fun thing. Free lensing, lens whacking if you're doing it for video. And I just really wanted to make this because this is a fun side of photography. So there's the quick tutorial for that. I think I answered a lot of the questions, but if you guys or girls have any more questions or comments, please leave those down below. Eric Rossi, the guy with the eye. Whack away. Lens whack away. Not